Chapter 35. God said to Jacob, "Now move on to Bethel and settle there. Build an altar there to worship me, the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." So Jacob told everyone in his household, "Destroy your idols, wash yourselves, and put on clean clothing. We are now going to Bethel, where I will build an altar to the God who answered my prayers when I was in distress. He has stayed with me wherever I have gone." So they gave Jacob all their idols and their earrings, and he buried them beneath the tree near Shechem. When they set out again, terror from God came over the people in all the towns of that area, and no one attacked them. Finally they arrived at Luz, now called Bethel in Canaan.
Jacob built an altar there and named it El Bethel, because God had appeared to him there at Bethel when he was fleeing from Esau.
Soon after this, Rebekah's old nurse Deborah died. She was buried beneath the oak tree in the valley below Bethel. Ever since, the tree has been called the Oak of Weeping. God appeared to Jacob once again when he arrived at Bethel after traveling from Padan Aram. God blessed him and said, "Your name is no longer Jacob. You will now be called Israel." Then God said, "I am God Almighty. Multiply and fill the earth. Become a great nation, even many nations. Kings will be among your descendants. And I will pass on to you the land I gave to Abraham and Isaac. Yes, I will give it to you and your descendants." Then God went up from the place where he had spoken to Jacob. Jacob set up a stone pillar to mark the place where God had spoken to him. He then poured wine over it as an offering to God and anointed the pillar with olive oil. Jacob called the place Bethel, House of God, because God had spoken to him there. Leaving Bethel, they traveled on toward Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. But Rachel's pains of childbirth began while they were still some distance away. After a very hard delivery, the midwife finally exclaimed, "Don't be afraid. You have another son." Rachel was about to die, but with her last breath she named him Benoni. The baby's father, however, called him Benjamin. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Jacob set up a stone monument over her grave, and it can be seen there to this day. Jacob then traveled on and camped beyond the Tower of Eder. While he was there, Reuben slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and someone told Jacob about it. These are the names of the 12 sons of Jacob. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's oldest son, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's servant, were Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's servant, were Gad and Asher. These were the sons born to Jacob at Padan Aram. So Jacob came home to his father Isaac in Mamre, which is near Kiriath Arba, now called Hebron, where Abraham had also lived. Isaac lived for 180 years, and he died at a ripe old age, joining his ancestors in death. Then his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Chapter 36. This is the history of the descendants of Esau, also known as Edom. Esau married 2 young women from Canaan, Adah, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Holibamah, the daughter of Anah and granddaughter of Zibeon the Hivite. He also married his cousin Basemath, who was the daughter of Ishmael and the sister of Nebaioth. Esau and Adah had a son named Eliphaz. Esau and Basemath had a son named Reuel. Esau and Oholibamah had sons named Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. All these sons were born to Esau in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives, children, household servants, cattle, and flocks, all the wealth he had gained in the land of Canaan, and moved away from his brother Jacob. There was not enough land to support them both because of all their cattle and livestock. So Esau, also known as Edom, settled in the hill country of Seir. This is a list of Esau's descendants, the Edomites, who live in the hill country of Seir. Among Esau's sons were Eliphaz, the son of Esau's wife Adah, and Reuel, the son of Esau's wife Basemath. The sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kenaz. Eliphaz had another son named Amalek, born to Timnah his concubine. These were all grandchildren of Esau's wife Adah. The sons of Reuel were Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. These were all grandchildren of Esau's wife Basemath. Esau also had sons through Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah, and granddaughter of Zibeon. Their names were Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. Esau's children and grandchildren became the leaders of different clans. The sons of Esau's oldest son Eliphaz became the leaders of the clans of Teman, Omar, Zepho, Kenaz, Korah, Gatam, and Amalek. These clans in the land of Edom were descended from Eliphaz, the son of Esau and Adah. The sons of Esau's son Reuel became the leaders of the clans of Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. These clans in the land of Edom were descended from Reuel, the son of Esau, and Basemath. The sons of Esau and his wife Oholibamah became the leaders of the clans of Jeush, Jalem, and Korah. These are the clans descended from Esau's wife Oholibamah, the daughter of Anah. These are all the clans descended from Esau, also known as Edom. These are the names of the tribes that descended from Seir the Horite, one of the families native to the land of Seir: Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishon. These were the Horite clans, the descendants of Seir who lived in the land of Edom. The sons of Lotan were Hori and Heman. Lotan's sister was named Timnah. The sons of Shobal were Alvan, Manahath, Ebal, Shepho, and Onam. The sons of Zibeon were Aiah and Anah. This is the Anah who discovered the hot springs in the wilderness while he was grazing his father's donkeys. The son of Anah was Dishon, and Oholibamah was his daughter. The sons of Dishon were Hemdan, Eshban, Ithran, and Kiran. The sons of Ezer were Bilhan, Zeavan, and Achan. The sons of Dishon were Uz and Aran. So the leaders of the Horite clans were Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anah, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. The Horite clans are named after their clan leaders who lived in the land of Seir. These are the kings who ruled in Edom before there were kings in Israel. Bela, son of Beor, who ruled from his city of Dinhabah. When Bela died, Jobab, son of Zerah from Basra, became king. When Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites became king.
When Husham died, Hadad, son of Bedad, became king and ruled from the city of Avith.
He was the one who destroyed the Midianite army in the land of Moab. When Hadad died, Samlah from the city of Masrekah became king. When Samlah died, Sheol from the city of Rehoboth on the Euphrates River became king. When Sheol died, Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, became king. When Baal-Hanan died, Hadad became king and ruled from the city of Peu. Hadad's wife was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred and granddaughter of Mezahab. These are the leaders of the clans of Esau who lived in the places named for them: Timnah, Elva, Jephith, Oholibamah, Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Teman, Mibzar, Magdiel, and Iram. These are the names of the clans of Esau, the ancestor of the Edomites, each clan giving its name to the area it occupied. Chapter 37. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived. This is the history of Jacob's family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks with his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Now Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day he gave Joseph a special gift, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because of their father's partiality. They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night Joseph had a dream and promptly reported the details to his brothers, causing them to hate him even more. "Listen to this dream," he announced. "We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. My bundle stood up, and then your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before it." "So, you are going to be our king, are you?" his brothers taunted. And they hated him all the more for his dream and what he had said. Then Joseph had another dream and told his brothers about it. "Listen to this dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told his father as well as his brothers, and his father rebuked him. "What do you mean?" his father asked. "Will your mother, your brothers, and I actually come and bow before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father gave it some thought and wondered what it all meant. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Your brothers are over at Shechem with the flocks. I'm going to send you to them." "I'm ready to go," Joseph replied. "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along," Jacob said. "Then come back and bring me word." So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from his home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man noticed him wandering around the countryside. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "For my brothers and their flocks," Joseph replied. "Have you seen them?" "Yes," the man told him, "for they are no longer here. I heard your brothers say they were going to Dothan." So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance and made plans to kill him. "Here comes that dreamer," they exclaimed. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into a deep pit. We can tell our father that a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of all his dreams." But Reuben came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed his blood? Let's just throw him alive into this pit here. That way he will die without our having to touch him." Reuben was secretly planning to help Joseph escape, and then he would bring him back to his father. So when Joseph arrived, they pulled off his beautiful robe and threw him into the pit. This pit was normally used to store water, but it was empty at the time. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they noticed a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking spices, balm, and myrrh from Gilead to Egypt. Judah said to the others, "What can we gain by killing our brother? That would just give us a guilty conscience. Let's sell Joseph to those Ishmaelite traders. Let's not be responsible for his death. After all, he is our brother." And his brothers agreed. So when the traders came by, his brothers pulled Joseph out of the pit and sold him for 20 pieces of silver. The Ishmaelite traders took him along to Egypt. Some time later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the pit. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in anguish and frustration. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, "The boy is gone. What can I do now?" Then Joseph's brothers killed a goat and dipped the robe in its blood. They took the beautiful robe to their father and asked him to identify it. "We found this in the field," they told him. "It's Joseph's robe, isn't it?" Their father recognized it at once. "Yes," he said. "It is my son's robe. A wild animal has attacked and eaten him. Surely Joseph has been torn in pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes and put on sackcloth. He mourned deeply for his son for many days. His family all tried to comfort him, but it was no use. "I will die in mourning for my son," he would say, and then begin to weep. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the traders sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. Chapter 38. About this time Judah left home and moved to Adullam, where he visited a man named Hira. There he met a Canaanite woman, the daughter of Shua, and he married her. She became pregnant and had a son, and Judah named the boy Then Judah's wife had another son, and she named him Onan. And when she had a third son, she named him Shelah. At the time of Shelah's birth, they were living at Kezib. When his oldest son grew up, Judah arranged his marriage to a young woman named Tamar. But was a wicked man in the Lord's sight, so the Lord took his life. Then Judah said to brother Onan, "You must marry Tamar, as our law requires of the brother of the man who has died. Her first son from you will be your brother's heir." But Onan was not willing to have a child who would not be his own heir. So whenever he had intercourse with Tamar, he spilled the semen on the ground to keep her from having a baby who would belong to his brother. But the Lord considered it a wicked thing for Onan to deny a child to his dead brother. So the Lord took Onan's life too. Then Judah told Tamar, his daughter-in-law, not to marry again at that time, but to return to her parents' home. She was to remain a widow until his youngest son, Shelah, was old enough to marry her. But Judah didn't really intend to do this because he was afraid Shelah would also die, like his two brothers. So Tamar went home to her parents. In the course of time, Judah's wife died. After the time of mourning was over, Judah and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went to Timnah to supervise the shearing of his sheep. Someone told Tamar that her father-in-law had left for the sheep shearing at Timnah. Tamar was aware that Shelah had grown up, but they had not called her to come and marry him. So she changed out of her widow's clothing and covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Then she sat beside the road of the entrance to the village of Enaim, which is on the way to Timnah. Judah noticed her as he went by and thought she was a prostitute, since her face was veiled. So he stopped and propositioned her to sleep with him, not realizing that she was his own daughter-in-law. "How much will you pay me?" Tamar asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," Judah promised. "What pledge will you give me so I can be sure you will send it?" she asked. "Well, what do you want?" he inquired. She replied, "I want your identification seal, your cord, and the walking stick you are carrying." So Judah gave these items to her. She then let him sleep with her, and she became pregnant. Afterward she went home, took off her veil, and put on her widow's clothing as usual. Judah asked his friend Hira, the Adullamite, to take the young goat back to her and to pick up the pledges he had given her. But Hira couldn't find her. So he asked the men who lived there, "Where can I find the prostitute who is sitting beside the road at the entrance to the village?" "We've never had a prostitute here," they replied. So Hira returned to Judah and told him that he couldn't find her anywhere, and that the men of the village had claimed they didn't have a prostitute there. "Then let her keep the pledges," Judah exclaimed. "We tried our best to send her the goat. We'd be the laughingstock of the village if we went back again." About 3 months later, word reached Judah that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, was pregnant as a result of prostitution. "Bring her out and burn her," Judah shouted. But as they were taking her out to kill her, she sent this message to her father-in-law. "The man who owns this identification seal and walking stick is the father of my child. Do you recognize them?" Judah admitted that they were his and said, "She is more in the right than I am, because I didn't keep my promise to let her marry my son Shelah." But Judah never slept with Tamar again. In due season the time of Tamar's delivery arrived, and she had twin sons. As they were being born, one of them reached out his hand, and the midwife tied a scarlet thread around the wrists of the child who appeared first, saying, "This one came out first." But then he drew back his hand, and the other baby was actually the first to be born. "What?" the midwife exclaimed. "How did you break out first?" And ever after he was called Perez. Then the baby with the scarlet thread on his wrist was born, and he was named Zerah. Chapter 39. Now when Joseph arrived in Egypt with the Ishmaelite traders, he was purchased by Potiphar, a member of the personal staff of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was the captain of the palace guard. The Lord was with Joseph and blessed him greatly as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this and realized that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. So Joseph naturally became quite a favorite with him. Potiphar soon put Joseph in charge of his entire household and entrusted him with all his business dealings. From the day Joseph was put in charge, the Lord began to bless Potiphar for Joseph's sake. All his household affairs began to run smoothly, and his crops and livestock flourished. So Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. With Joseph there, he didn't have a worry in the world, except to decide what he wanted to eat. Now Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. And about this time Potiphar's wife began to desire him and invited him to sleep with her. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How can I ever do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." She kept putting pressure on him day after day, but he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he was doing his work inside the house. She came and grabbed him by his shirt, demanding, "Sleep with me." Joseph tore himself away, but as he did, his shirt came off. She was left holding it as he ran from the house. When she saw that she had his shirt and that he had fled, she began screaming. Soon all the men around the place came running. "My husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to insult us," she sobbed. "He tried to rape me, but I screamed. When he heard my loud cries, he ran and left his shirt behind with me." She kept the shirt with her, and when her husband came home that night, she told him her story. "That Hebrew slave you've had around here tried to make a fool of me," she said. "I was saved only by my screams. He ran out, leaving his shirt behind." After hearing his wife's story, Potiphar was furious. He took Joseph and threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. For the Lord was with Joseph there too, and he granted Joseph favor with the chief jailer. Before long, the jailer put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The chief jailer had no more worries after that, because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him, making everything run smoothly and successfully. Chapter 40. Some time later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended him. Pharaoh became very angry with these officials, and he put them in the prison where Joseph was, in the palace of Potiphar, the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for quite some time, and Potiphar assigned Joseph to take care of them. One night the cupbearer and the baker each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. The next morning Joseph noticed the dejected look on their faces. "Why do you look so worried today?" he asked. And they replied, "We both had dreams last night, but there is no one here to tell us what they mean." "Interpreting dreams is God's business," Joseph replied. "Tell me what you saw." The cupbearer told his dream first. "In my dream," he said, "I saw a vine in front of me. It had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon there were clusters of ripe grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed the juice into it. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand."
"I know what the dream means," Joseph said.
"The 3 branches mean 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will take you out of prison and return you to your position as his chief cupbearer." And please, have some pity on me when you are back in his favor. Mention me to Pharaoh and ask him to let me out of here. I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in jail, but I did nothing to deserve it." When the chief baker saw that the first dream had such a good meaning, he told his dream to Joseph too. "In my dream," he said, "there were 3 baskets of pastries on my head. In the top basket were all kinds of bakery goods for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them." "I'll tell you what it means," Joseph told him. "The 3 baskets mean 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will cut off your head and impale your body on a pole. Then birds will come and peck away at your flesh." Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he gave a banquet for all his officials and household staff. He sent for his chief cupbearer and chief baker, and they were brought to him from the prison. He then restored the chief cupbearer to his former position. But he sentenced the chief baker to be impaled on a pole, just as Joseph had predicted. Pharaoh's cupbearer, however, promptly forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought.
Chapter 41. 2 years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, 7 fat, healthy-looking cows suddenly came up out of the river and began grazing along its bank. Then 7 other cows came up from the river, but these were very ugly and gaunt. These cows went over and stood beside the fat cows. Then the thin, ugly cows ate the fat ones. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up. Soon he fell asleep again and had a second dream. This time he saw 7 heads of grain on one stalk, with every kernel well-formed and plump. Then suddenly 7 more heads appeared on the stalk, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump, well-formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, as he thought about it, Pharaoh became very concerned as to what the dreams might mean. So he called for all the magicians and wise men of Egypt and told them about his dreams, but not one of them could suggest what they meant. Then the king's cupbearer spoke up. "Today I have been reminded of my failure," he said. "Some time ago you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had a meaning. We told the dreams to a young Hebrew man who was a servant of the captain of the guard. He told us what each of our dreams meant, and everything happened just as he said it would. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and the chief baker was executed and impaled on a pole." Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was brought hastily from the dungeon. After a quick shave and change of clothes, he went in and stood in Pharaoh's presence. "I had a dream last night," Pharaoh told him, "and none of these men can tell me what it means. But I have heard that you can interpret dreams, and that is why I have called for you." "It is beyond my power to do this," Joseph replied. "But God will tell you what it means and will set you at ease." So Pharaoh told him the dream. "I was standing on the bank of the Nile River," he said. "Suddenly 7 fat, healthy-looking cows came up out of the river and began grazing along its bank. But then 7 other cows came up from the river. They were very thin and gaunt. In fact, I've never seen such ugly animals in all the land of Egypt. These thin, ugly cows ate up the 7 fat ones that had come out of the river first. But afterward they were still as ugly and gaunt as before. Then I woke up. A little later I had another dream. This time there were 7 heads of grain on one stalk, and all 7 heads were plump and full. And out of the same stalk came 7 withered heads, shriveled by the east wind. And the withered heads swallowed up the plump ones. I told these dreams to my magicians, but not one of them could tell me what they mean." "Both dreams mean the same thing," Joseph told Pharaoh. God was telling you what he is about to do. The 7 fat cows and the 7 plump heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, ugly cows and the 7 withered heads of grain represent 7 years of famine. This will happen just as I have described it, for God has shown you what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. But afterward there will be 7 years of famine so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten and wiped out. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so terrible that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having the dream twice, it means that the matter has been decreed by God and that he will make these events happen soon. My suggestion is that you find the wisest man in Egypt and put him in charge of a nationwide program. Let Pharaoh appoint officials over the land, and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food and grain of these good years into the royal storehouses, and store it away so there will be food in the cities. That way there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come. Otherwise, disaster will surely strike the land, and all the people will die. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his advisers. As they discussed who should be appointed for the job, Pharaoh said, "Who could do it better than Joseph? For he is a man who is obviously filled with the Spirit of God." Turning to Joseph, Pharaoh said, "Since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, you are the wisest man in the land. I hereby appoint you to direct this project. You will manage my household and organize all my people. Only I will have a rank higher than yours." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh placed his own signet ring on Joseph's finger as a symbol of his authority. He dressed him in beautiful clothing and placed the royal gold chain about his neck. Pharaoh also gave Joseph the chariot of his second-in-command, and wherever he went the command was shouted, "Kneel down!" So Joseph was put in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am the king, but no one will move a hand or a foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval." Pharaoh renamed him Zaphanath-Paneah, and gave him a wife, a young woman named Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of Heliopolis. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he made a tour of inspection throughout the land. And sure enough, for the next 7 years there were bumper crops everywhere. During those years, Joseph took a portion of all the crops grown in Egypt and stored them for the government in nearby cities. After 7 years, the granaries were filled to overflowing. There was so much grain like sand on the seashore that the people could not keep track of the amount. During this time, before the arrival of the first of the famine years, 2 sons were born to Joseph and his wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of Heliopolis. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, for he said, "God has made me forget all my troubles and the family of my father." Joseph named his second son Ephraim, for he said, "God has made me fruitful in this land of my suffering." At last the 7 years of plenty came to an end. Then the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. There were crop failures in all the surrounding countries too, but in Egypt there was plenty of grain in the storehouses. Throughout the land of Egypt, the people began to starve. They pleaded with Pharaoh for food, and he told them, "Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you." So with severe famine everywhere in the land, Joseph opened up the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. And people from surrounding lands also came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe throughout the world. Chapter 42. When Jacob heard that there was grain available in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy some for us before we all starve to death." So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother Benjamin go with them, however, for fear some harm might come to him. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine had reached Canaan as well. Since Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of the sale of the grain, it was to him that his brothers came. They bowed low before him with their faces to the ground. Joseph recognized them instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger.
"Where are you from?"
he demanded roughly.
"From the land of Canaan,"
they replied.
"We have come to buy grain."
Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him, but Joseph recognized them. And he remembered the dreams he had had many years before. He said to them,
"You are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become."
"No, my lord,"
they exclaimed.
"We have come to buy food. We are all brothers and honest men, sir. We are not spies."
"Yes, you are,"
he insisted.
"You have come to discover how vulnerable the famine has made us."
"Sir,"
they said,
"there are 12 of us brothers, and our father is in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is there with our father, and one of our brothers is no longer with us."
But Joseph insisted.
"As I said, you are spies. This is how I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will not leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. One of you go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here bound in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true. If it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I'll know you are spies."
So he put them all in prison for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to them,
"I am a God-fearing man. If you do as I say, you will live. We'll see how honorable you really are. Only one of you will remain in the prison. The rest of you may go on home with grain for your families. But bring your youngest brother back to me. In this way, I will know whether or not you are telling me the truth. If you are, I will spare you."
To this they agreed. Speaking among themselves, they said,
"This has all happened because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his terror and anguish and heard his pleadings, but we wouldn't listen. That's why this trouble has come upon us."
"Didn't I tell you not to do it?"
Reuben asked.
"But you wouldn't listen. And now we're going to die because we murdered him."
Of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them as he was standing there, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. Now he left the room and found a place where he could weep. Returning, he talked some more with them. He then chose Simeon from among them and had him tied up right before their eyes. Joseph then ordered his servants to fill them in sacks with grain. But he also gave secret instructions to return each brother's payment at the top of his sack. He also gave them provisions for their journey. So they loaded up their donkeys with the grain and started for home. But when they stopped for the night and one of them opened his sack to get some grain to feed the donkeys, he found his money in the sack. "Look," he exclaimed to his brothers, "my money is here in my sack." They were filled with terror and said to each other, "What has God done to us?" So they came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan and told him all that had happened. "The man who is ruler over the land spoke very roughly to us," they told him. "He took us for spies. But we said, 'We are honest men, not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of one father. One brother has disappeared, and the youngest is with our father in the land of Canaan.' Then the man, the ruler of the land, told us, 'This is the way I will find out if you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take grain for your families and go on home. But bring your youngest brother back to me. Then I will know that you are honest men and not spies. If you prove to be what you say, then I will give you back your brother, and you may come as often as you like to buy grain.' As they emptied out the sacks, there at the top of each one was the bag of money paid for the grain. Terror gripped them as it did their father. Jacob exclaimed, 'You have deprived me of my children. Joseph has disappeared, Simeon is gone, and Now you want to take Benjamin too. Everything is going against me."
Then Reuben said to his father, "You may kill my 2 sons if I don't bring Benjamin back to you. I'll be responsible for him."
But Jacob replied, "My son will not go down with you, for his brother Joseph is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children. If anything should happen to him, you would bring my gray head down to the grave in deep sorrow." Chapter 43. But there was no relief from the terrible famine throughout the land. When the grain they had brought from Egypt was almost gone, Jacob said to his sons, "Go again, and buy us a little food." But Judah said, "The man wasn't joking when he warned that we couldn't see him again unless Benjamin came along. If you let him come with us, we will go down and buy some food. But if you don't let Benjamin go, we may as well stay at home. Remember that the man said you won't be allowed to come and see me unless your brother is with you."
"Why did you ever tell him you had another brother?" Jacob moaned. "Why did you have to treat me with such cruelty?"
"But the man specifically asked us about our family," they replied. "He wanted to know whether our father was still living, and he asked us if we had another brother, so we told him. How could we have known he would say, 'Bring me your brother'?" Judah said to his father, "Send the boy with me, and we will be on our way. Otherwise we will all die of starvation, and not only we, but you and our little ones. I personally guarantee his safety. If I don't bring him back to you, then let me bear the blame forever. For we could have gone and returned twice by this time if you had let him come without delay." So their father Jacob finally said to them, "If it can't be avoided, then at least do this. Fill your bags with the best products of the land. Take them to the man as gifts: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the money that you found in your sacks, as it was probably someone's mistake. Then take your brother and go back to the man. May God Almighty give you mercy as you go before the man, that he might release Simeon and return Benjamin. And if I must bear the anguish of their deaths, then so be it." So they took Benjamin and the gifts and double the money and hurried to Egypt, where they presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them, he said to the manager of his household,
"These men will eat with me this noon. Take them inside and prepare a big feast."
So the man did as he was told and took them to Joseph's palace. They were badly frightened when they saw where they were being taken.
"It's because of the money returned to us in our sacks,"
they said.
"He plans to pretend that we stole it. Then he will seize us as slaves and take our donkeys."
As the brothers arrived at the entrance to the palace, they went over to the man in charge of Joseph's household. They said to him,
"Sir, after our first trip to Egypt to buy food, as we were returning home, we stopped for the night and opened our sacks. The money we had used to pay for the grain was there in our sacks. Here it is. We have brought it back again. We also have additional money to buy more grain. We have no idea how the money got into our sacks."
"Relax. Don't worry about it,"
the household manager told them.
"Your God, the God of your ancestors, must have put it there. We collected your money all right."
Then he released Simeon and brought him out to them. The brothers were then led into the palace and given water to wash their feet and food for their donkeys. They were told they would be eating there, so they prepared their gifts for Joseph's arrival at noon. When Joseph came, they gave him their gifts and bowed low before him. He asked them how they had been getting along, and then he said,
"How is your father, the old man you spoke about? Is he still alive?"
"Yes,"
they replied.
"He is alive and well."
Then they bowed again before him. Looking at his brother Benjamin, Joseph asked,
"Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about? May God be gracious to you, my son."
Then Joseph made a hasty exit because he was overcome with emotion for his brother and wanted to cry. Going into his private room, he wept there. Then he washed his face and came out, keeping himself under control.
Bring on the food,
he ordered. Joseph ate by himself, and his brothers were served at a separate table. The Egyptians sat at their own table because Egyptians despise Hebrews and refuse to eat with them. Joseph told each of his brothers where to sit, and to their amazement he seated them in the order of their ages, from oldest to youngest. Their food was served to them from Joseph's own table. He gave the largest serving to Benjamin, 5 times as much as to any of the others. So they all feasted and drank freely with him. Chapter 44. When his brothers were ready to leave, Joseph gave these instructions to the man in charge of his household. Fill each of their sacks with as much grain as they can carry, and put each man's money back into a sack. Then put my personal silver cup at the top of the youngest brother's sack, along with his grain money. So the household manager did as he was told. The brothers were up at dawn and set out on their journey with their loaded donkeys. But when they were barely out of the city, Joseph said to his household manager, "Chase after them and stop them. Ask them, 'Why have you repaid an act of kindness with such evil? What do you mean by stealing my master's personal silver drinking cup, which he uses to predict the future? What a wicked thing you have done.'" So the man caught up with them and spoke to them in the way he had been instructed. "What are you talking about?" the brothers responded. "What kind of people do you think we are that you accuse us of such a terrible thing? Didn't we bring back the money we found in our sacks? Why would we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If you find his cup with any one of us, let that one die, and all the rest of us will be your master's slaves forever." "Fair enough," the man replied, "except that only the one who stole it will be a slave. The rest of you may go free." They quickly took their sacks from the backs of their donkeys and opened them. Joseph's servant began searching the oldest brother's sack, going on down the line to the youngest. The cup was found in Benjamin's sack. At this they tore their clothing in despair, loaded the donkeys again, and returned to the city. Joseph was still at home when Judah and his brothers arrived, and they fell to the ground before him. "What were you trying to do?" Joseph demanded. "Didn't you know that a man such as I would know who stole it?" And Judah said, "Oh, my lord, what can we say to you? How can we plead? How can we prove our innocence? God is punishing us for our sins. My lord, we have all returned to be your slaves, we and our brother who had your cup in his sack." "No," Joseph said. "Only the man who stole the cup will be my slave. The rest of you may go home to your father." Then Judah stepped forward and said, "My lord, let me say just this one word to you. Be patient with me for a moment, for I know you could have me killed in an instant, as though you were Pharaoh himself. You asked us, my lord, if we had a father or a brother. We said, 'Yes, we have a father, an old man, and a child of his old age, his youngest son. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him very much. And you said to us, "Bring him here so I can see him." But we said to you, "My lord, the boy cannot leave his father, for his father would die." But you told us, "You may not see me again unless your youngest brother is with you." So we returned to our father and told him what you had said. And when he said, "Go back again and buy us a little food," we replied, "We can't unless you let our youngest brother go with us. We won't be allowed to see the man in charge of the grain unless our youngest brother is with us." Then my father said to us, "You know that my wife had 2 sons, and that one of them went away and never returned, doubtless torn to pieces by some wild animal. I've never seen him since. If you take away his brother from me too, and any harm comes to him, you would bring my gray head down to the grave in deep sorrow. And now, my lord, I cannot go back to my father without the boy. Our father's life is bound up in the boy's life. When he sees that the boy is not with us, our father will die. We will be responsible for bringing his gray head down to the grave in sorrow. My lord, I made a pledge to my father that I would take care of the boy. I told him, if I don't bring him back to you, I will bear the blame forever. Please, my lord, let me stay here as a slave instead of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers. For how can I return to my father if the boy is not with me? I cannot bear to see what this would do to him." Chapter 45. Joseph could stand it no longer.
"Out, all of you!"
He cried out to his attendants. He wanted to be alone with his brothers when he told them who he was. Then he broke down and wept aloud. His sobs could be heard throughout the palace, and the news was quickly carried to Pharaoh's palace.
"I am Joseph,"
he said to his brothers.
"Is my father still alive?"
But his brothers were speechless. They were stunned to realize that Joseph was standing there in front of them.
"Come over here,"
he said. So they came closer, and he said again,
"I am Joseph, your brother whom you sold into Egypt. But don't be angry with yourself that you did this to me, for God did it. He sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. These 2 years of famine will grow to 7, during which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God has sent me here to keep you and your families alive, so that you will become a great nation. Yes, it was God who sent me here, not you. And He has made me counselor to Pharaoh, manager of his entire household, and ruler over all Egypt. Hurry, return to my father and tell him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me master over all the land of Egypt. Come down to me right away. You will live here in the land of Goshen, so that you can be near me with all your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds and all that you have. I will take care of you there, for there are still 5 years of famine ahead of us. Otherwise, you and your household will come to utter poverty."
Then Joseph said,
"You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that I really am Joseph. Tell my father how I am honored here in Egypt. Tell him about everything you have seen, and bring him to me quickly."
Weeping with joy, he embraced Benjamin, and Benjamin also began to weep. Then Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them, and then they began talking freely with him. The news soon reached Pharaoh. "Joseph's brothers have come." Pharaoh was very happy to hear this, and so were his officials. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Tell your brothers to load their pack animals and return quickly to their homes in Canaan. Tell them to bring your father and all of their families and to come here to Egypt to live. Tell them, Pharaoh will assign to you the very best territory in the land of Egypt. You will live off the fat of the land. And tell your brothers to take wagons from Egypt to carry their wives and little ones, and to bring your father here. Don't worry about your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours." So the sons of Jacob did as they were told. Joseph gave them wagons, as Pharaoh had commanded, and he supplied them with provisions for the journey. And he gave each of them new clothes. But to Benjamin he gave 5 changes of clothes and 300 pieces of silver. He sent his father 10 donkeys loaded with the good things of Egypt, and 10 donkeys loaded with grain and all kinds of other food to be eaten on his journey. So he sent his brothers off, and as they left he called after them, "Don't quarrel along the way." And they left Egypt and returned to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. "Joseph is still alive," they told him, "and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt." Jacob was stunned at the news. He couldn't believe it. But when they had given him Joseph's messages, and when he saw the wagons loaded with the food sent by Joseph, his spirit revived. Then Jacob said, "It must be true. My son Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die." Chapter 46. So Jacob set out for Egypt with all his possessions. And when he came to Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. During the night God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," he called. "Here I am," Jacob replied. "I am God," the voice said, "the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will see to it that you become a great nation there. I will go with you down to Egypt, and I will bring your descendants back again. But you will die in Egypt with Joseph at your side." So Jacob left Beersheba, and his sons brought him to Egypt. They carried their little ones and wives in the wagons Pharaoh had provided for them. They brought their livestock too, and all the belongings they had acquired in the land of Canaan. Jacob and his entire family arrived in Egypt, sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters, all his descendants. These are the names of the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob who went with him to Egypt. Reuben was Jacob's oldest son. The sons of Reuben were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jachin, Zohar, and Shael. Shael's mother was a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah were Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan had died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Issachar were Tola, Puah, Jashub, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun were Sered, Elon, and Jaleel. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to Leah in Padan Aram, along with their sister Dinah. In all, Jacob's descendants through Leah numbered 33. The sons of Gad were Zephon, Haggai, Shunai, Ezbon, Eri, Arodi, and Areli. The sons of Asher were Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. Their sister was named Serah. Beriah's sons were Heber and Malchiel. These 16 were descendants of Jacob through Zilpah, the servant given to Leah by her father Laban. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. Joseph's sons born in the land of Egypt were Manasseh and Ephraim. Their mother was Asenath, daughter of Potipherah, priest of Heliopolis. Benjamin's sons were Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Jerah, Naaman, Ehi, Rash, Muppim, Huppim, and Ard. These 14 were the descendants of Jacob and his wife Rachel. The son of Dan was Hushim. The sons of Naphtali were Jaziel, Uni, Jezer, and Shelem. These 7 were the descendants of Jacob through Bilhah, the servant given to Rachel by her father Laban. So the total number of Jacob's direct descendants who went with him to Egypt, not counting his sons' wives, was 66. Joseph also had 2 sons who had been born in Egypt. So altogether there were 70 members of Jacob's family in the land of Egypt. Jacob sent Judah on ahead to meet Joseph and get directions to the land of Goshen. And when they all arrived there, Joseph prepared his chariot and traveled to Goshen to meet his father. As soon as Joseph arrived, he embraced his father and wept on his shoulder for a long time. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "Now let me die, for I have seen you with my own eyes and know you are still alive." And Joseph said to his brothers and to all their households, "I'll go and tell Pharaoh that you have all come from the land of Canaan to join me. And I will tell him, these men are shepherds and livestock breeders. They have brought with them their flocks and herds and everything they own. So when Pharaoh calls for you and asks you about your occupation, tell him, we have been livestock breeders from our youth, as our ancestors have been for many generations. When you tell him this, he will let you live here in the land of Goshen, for shepherds are despised in the land of Egypt." Chapter 47. So Joseph went to see Pharaoh and said, "My father and my brothers are here from Canaan." They came with all their flocks and herds and possessions, and they are now in the land of Goshen. Joseph took 5 of his brothers with him and presented them to Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked them, "What is your occupation?" And they replied, "We are shepherds like our ancestors. We have come to live here in Egypt, for there is no pasture for our flocks in Canaan. The famine is very severe there. We request permission to live in the land of Goshen." And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Now that your family has joined you here, choose any place you like for them to live. Give them the best land of Egypt. The land of Goshen will be fine. And if any of them have special skills, put them in charge of my livestock too." Then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. "How old are you?" Pharaoh asked him. Jacob replied, "I have lived for 130 hard years, but I am still not nearly as old as many of my ancestors." Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh again before he left. So Joseph assigned the best land of Egypt, the land of Ramesses, to his father and brothers, just as Pharaoh had commanded. And Joseph furnished food to his father and brothers in amounts appropriate to the number of their dependents. Meanwhile, the famine became worse and worse, and the crops continued to fail throughout Egypt and Canaan. Joseph collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan in exchange for grain, and he brought the money to Pharaoh's treasure house. When the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, they came to Joseph crying again for food. "Our money is gone," they said, "but give us bread. Why should we die?" "Well then," Joseph replied, "since your money is gone, give me your livestock. I will give you food in exchange." So they gave their livestock to Joseph in exchange for food. Soon all the horses, flocks, herds, and donkeys of Egypt were in Pharaoh's possession. But at least they were able to purchase food for that year. The next year they came again and said, "Our money is gone, and our livestock are yours. We have nothing left but our bodies and land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We will then become servants to Pharaoh. Just give us grain so that our lives may be saved, and so the land will not become empty and desolate." So Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold him their fields because the famine was so severe, and their land then belonged to Pharaoh. Thus all the people of Egypt became servants to Pharaoh. "Keep 4/5 for yourselves, and use it to plant the next year's crop and to feed yourselves, your households, and your little ones." "You have saved our lives," they exclaimed. "May it please you, sir, to let us be Pharaoh's servants." Joseph then made it a law throughout the land of Egypt, and it is still the law, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all the crops grown on his land. But since Pharaoh had not taken over the priest's land, they were exempt from this payment. So the people of Israel settled in the land of Goshen in Egypt. Before long they began to prosper there, and their population grew rapidly. Jacob lived for 17 years after his arrival in Egypt, so he was 147 years old when he died. As the time of his death drew near, he called for his son Joseph and said to him, "If you are pleased with me, swear most solemnly that you will honor this my last request. Do not bury me in Egypt. When I am dead, take me out of Egypt and bury me beside my ancestors." So Joseph promised that he would. "Swear that you will do it," Jacob insisted. So Joseph gave his oath, and Jacob bowed in worship as he leaned on his staff. Chapter 48. One day, not long after this, word came to Joseph that his father was failing rapidly. So Joseph went to visit him, and he took with him his 2 sons Manasseh and Ephraim. When Jacob heard that Joseph had arrived, he gathered his strength and sat up in bed to greet him. Jacob said to Joseph,
God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. He said to me, I will make you a multitude of nations, and I will give this land of Canaan to you and your descendants as an everlasting possession. Now I am adopting as my own sons these 2 boys of yours, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born here in the land of Egypt before I arrived. They will inherit from me just as Reuben and Simeon will. But the children born to you in the future will be your own. The land they inherit will be within the territories of Ephraim and Manasseh. As I was returning from Padan, Rachel died in the land of Canaan. We were still on the way, just a short distance from Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. So, with great sorrow, I buried her there beside the road to Ephrath. Then Jacob looked over at the 2 boys. Are these your sons? He asked. Yes, Joseph told him. These are the sons God has given me here in Egypt. And Jacob said, Bring them over to me, and I will bless them. Now Jacob was half blind because of his age and could hardly see. So Joseph brought the boys close to him, and Jacob kissed and embraced them. Then Jacob said to Joseph, I never thought I would see you again. But now God has let me see your children too. Joseph took the boys from their grandfather's knees, and he bowed low to him. Then he positioned the boys so Ephraim was at Jacob's left hand, and Manasseh was at his right hand. But Jacob crossed his arms as he reached out to lay his hands on the boys' heads. So his right hand was on the head of Ephraim, the younger boy, and his left hand was on the head of Manasseh, the older. Then he blessed Joseph and said, May God, the God before whom my grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life, and the angel who has kept me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they preserve my name and the names of my grandfather Abraham and my father Isaac, and may they become a mighty nation. But Joseph was upset when he saw that his father had laid his right hand on Ephraim's head. So he lifted it to place it on Manasseh's head instead. No, father, he said. This one over here is older. Put your right hand on his head. But his father refused. I know what I'm doing, my son, he said. Manasseh, too, will become a great people, but his younger brother will become even greater. His descendants will become a multitude of nations. So Jacob blessed the boys that day with this blessing. The people of Israel will use your names to bless each other. They will say, May God make you as prosperous as Ephraim and Manasseh. In this way Jacob put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Jacob said to Joseph, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to Canaan, the land of your ancestors. And I give you an extra portion beyond what I have given your brothers, the portion that I took from the Amorites with my sword and bow. Chapter 49. Then Jacob called together all his sons and said, Gather around me, and I will tell you what is going to happen to you in the days to come. Come and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. Reuben, you are my oldest son, the child of my vigorous youth. You are first on the list in rank and honor. But you are as unruly as the waves of the sea, and you will be first no longer. For you slept with one of my wives, you dishonored me in my own bed.
Simeon and Levi are two of a kind, men of violence, so my soul stay away from them. May I never be a party to their wicked plans, for in their anger they murdered men and they crippled oxen just for sport. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce. Cursed be their wrath, for it is cruel. Therefore I will scatter their descendants throughout the nation of Israel. Judah, your brothers will praise you. You will defeat your enemies. All your relatives will bow before you. Judah is a young lion that has finished eating its prey. Like a lion he crouches and lies down. Like a lioness, who will dare to rouse him? The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from his descendants, until the coming of the one to whom it belongs, the one whom all nations will obey. He ties his foal to a grapevine, the colt of his donkey to a choice vine. He washes his clothes in wine because his harvest is so plentiful. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. Zebulun will settle on the shores of the sea, and will be a harbor for ships. His borders will extend to Sidon. Issachar is a strong beast of burden, resting among the sheepfolds. When he sees how good the countryside is, how pleasant the land, he will bend his shoulder to the task and submit to forced labor. Dan will govern his people like any other tribe in Israel. He will be a snake beside the road, a poisonous viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so the rider is thrown off. I trust in you for salvation, O Lord. Gad will be plundered by marauding bands, but he will turn and plunder them. Asher will produce rich foods, food fit for kings. Naphtali is a deer let loose, producing magnificent fawns. Joseph is a fruitful tree beside a fountain. His branches reach over the wall. He has been attacked by archers who shot at him and harassed him, but his bow remained strong, and his arms were strengthened by the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, the rock of Israel. May the God of your ancestors help you. May the Almighty bless you with the blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the earth beneath, and blessings of the breasts and womb. May the blessings of your ancestors be greater than the blessings of the eternal mountains, reaching to the utmost bounds of the everlasting hills. These blessings will fall on the head of Joseph, who is a prince among his brothers. Benjamin is a wolf that prowls. He devours his enemies in the morning, and in the evening he divides the plunder. These are the 12 tribes of Israel, and these are the blessings with which Jacob blessed his 12 sons. Each received a blessing that was appropriate to him. Then Jacob told them, "Soon I will die. Bury me with my father and grandfather in the cave in Ephron's field. This is the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite for a permanent burial place. There Abraham and his wife Sarah are buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah are buried, and there I buried Leah. It is the cave that my grandfather Abraham bought from the Hittites." Then when Jacob had finished this charge to his sons, he lay back in the bed, breathed his last, and died. Chapter 50. Joseph threw himself on his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph told his morticians to embalm the body. The embalming process took 40 days, and there was a period of national mourning for 70 days. When the period of mourning was over, Joseph approached Pharaoh's advisers and asked them to speak to Pharaoh on his behalf. He told them, "Tell Pharaoh that my father made me swear an oath. He said to me, 'I am about to die. Take my body back to the land of Canaan and bury me in our family's burial cave. Now I need to go and bury my father. After his burial is complete, I will return without delay." Pharaoh agreed to Joseph's request. "Go and bury your father as you promised," he said. So Joseph went with a great number of Pharaoh's counselors and advisers, all the senior officers of Egypt. Joseph also took his brothers and the entire household of Jacob. But they left their little children and flocks and herds in the land of Goshen. So a great number of chariots, cavalry, and people accompanied Joseph. When they arrived at the threshing floor of Atad near the Jordan River, they held a very great and solemn funeral, with a 7-day period of mourning for Joseph's father. The local residents, the Canaanites, renamed the place Abel Mizraim, for they said, "This is a place of very deep mourning for these Egyptians." So Jacob's sons did as he had commanded them. They carried his body to the land of Canaan and buried it there in the cave of Machpelah. This is the cave that Abraham had bought for a permanent burial place in the field of Ephron the Hittite near Mamre. Then Joseph returned to Egypt with his brothers and all who had accompanied him to his father's funeral. But now that their father was dead, Joseph's brothers became afraid. "Now Joseph will pay us back for all the evil we did to him," they said. So they sent this message to Joseph. "Before your father died, he instructed us to say to you, 'Forgive your brothers for the great evil they did to you.' So we, the servants of the God of your father, beg you to forgive us." When Joseph received the message, he broke down and wept. Then his brothers came and bowed low before him. "We are your slaves," they said. But Joseph told them, "Don't be afraid of me. Am I God to judge and punish you? As far as I am concerned, God turned into good what you meant for evil. He brought me to the high position I have today so I could save the lives of many people. Oh, don't be afraid. Indeed, I myself will take care of you and your families." And he spoke very kindly to them, reassuring them. So Joseph and his brothers and their families continued to live in Egypt. Joseph was 110 years old when he died. He lived to see 3 generations of descendants of his son Ephraim and the children of Manasseh's son Machir, who were treated as if they were his own. "Soon I will die," Joseph told his brothers. "But God will surely come for you to lead you out of this land of Egypt. He will bring you back to the land he vowed to give to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath, and he said, "When God comes to lead us back to Canaan, you must take my body back with you." So Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him, and his body was placed in a coffin in Egypt.